Today is day number 5 of the April 87 7-day retreat. Somebody mentioned to me about yesterday's talk something that was not clear or leading to misunderstanding. And maybe we can clear this up. It's really very good when people bring these things up so we can go further and say things that were not said. For all of us. This person said, it seemed in your talk. No, he didn't say it seemed, he said you did oppose thinking and awareness. Thinking being the opposite of awareness. And isn't it entirely possible for thought to come out of awareness? I'm phrasing it myself, I don't remember exactly what was said. First of all, there was no intention to oppose thought with awareness, that awareness is the opposite of thinking. If one watches one's thinking throughout the day, one will find that we do think in opposites all the time. We talk about the black and white mentality. Something is either this way or if it's not this way, it must be the opposite. And this being a very prominent, age-old category of thinking, one imposes it so easily upon what one hears and thinks this is what is being said. And maybe it was not put clearly, it sounded like that. If there is any opposite to thinking, it would be no thinking. Thinking and no thinking. But no thinking is not necessarily awareness. No thinking can be a state produced through all kinds of different methods, or maybe taking chemicals. A state of brain shock, amnesia, or there's a Latin word for it which I can't think about, where thought and memory don't function. So, awareness is not opposed to thinking. And the other question that was brought up, isn't it entirely possible that out of awareness can come thought? Of course. Here, in looking at something together, there's awareness. Not just of what one is about to say, but of the birds and the breeze, the feeling of the body. Breath, heartbeat, some distant hum, whatever that is. And yet using language to say these things, which is already the operation of memory and thought, isn't it? And memory in this state of open looking at something and trying to express it, put it into words, memory supplies quite freely, not just words, but examples, incident that may have happened. We were talking about some war incident the other day. It's not that memory is disconnected. Obviously, thought is not disconnected. We couldn't be talking with each other. What we were trying to do yesterday was to watch thought as it happens, to catch it, to be aware of its happening. Because so often, until one really is concerned with this, when we say thoughts are phantoms in the air, or they have no substance, they can't be seen, or I remember this was often mentioned in the Buddhist scriptures, that a thought is nothing of substance that cannot be gotten a hold of, or I forget the particular wording, which seemed disconcerting at the time. It wasn't accessible. And here we were trying to, in listening to the birds, to see the word bird come up, the reaction to the bird, or whatever we were using at the time. The associations, the desire to know more about the name of the bird, and to see if one couldn't observe right here and now how, as these words and reactions and associations take place, the sound of the bird call itself recedes in the background or isn't heard at all, because now an internal auditorium has opened up in which one is active and paying attention there on a very, very limited scale. To see that was the purpose of the talk. And to question over and over again if there can be a listening awareness without the word. Without the need for description, explanation, reaction, association. And we weren't saying, I wasn't saying, don't associate, don't label, don't react. Because then one doesn't see anything. Then one has new rules to follow by, a new auditorium, a new stage, on which I've got my role laid out for me, what I should do and shouldn't do. It was an invitation to look and listen to what has happened internally and externally, so that there can be a real, clear, direct, immediate understanding, which has nothing to do with following somebody's directions or rules or memorizing that person's words, but this thing happening in oneself on its own, through questioning and listening. It's very good that this thing was brought up about, is there not thought and awareness? And doesn't thought have to function in one's daily life? It functions. Almost our whole daily life is wrapped up and permeated with thinking. The question here is, can some of our daily thought come out of awareness, not out of the habit of thinking, habit of reacting, which is connected with our whole past training, education, conditioning, programming. Whether indeed there can be intelligent thought meaning coming out of the openness and non-dividedness of attention. Not divided by the powerful system which is the me. Me with its motives and its goals and its emotions, reactions, which usually directs the way our thoughts proceed. That's where thoughts usually come from, out of this self-system. It is not said condemnatorily, but factually. One can observe it for oneself. And here someone questions, can thought come out of the openness of awareness? Not just at a moment of a talk or a meeting or a retreat, but in one's daily life, which is the life of relationship with each other and with the things of this world. Can there be intelligent thought not dictated by the self-system? It's so important to raise this question, because if I recall correctly from previous long years of training in a spiritual center of the Zen tradition, it seemed what came across was that thinking was sort of summarily discouraged. The spiritual practice was one of emptying the mind of thought by means of a method, a practice. And if thinking had to take place, the teacher was providing it for one, the teacher and the scriptures. One was made to feel that one was not ready at this point, and who knows when to think for oneself. Maybe not in this lifetime. And therefore, the presentation of things to believe in, to follow, presented by those who did have this insight. Whether they did or not was not to be questioned. The whole question didn't come up. How does one know whether somebody speaks out of awareness? We touched upon that. I think it was the last talk at the friend's house in Rochester. We talked about that. How can one tell for oneself whether the person who is speaking speaks out of that self-system and therefore enforces it and perpetuates it in oneself, in the listener, and in herself and himself, or doesn't, speaks out of this emptiness of awareness, empty of the self-system. It's a very important question to ask. At least to have that question there, because if it isn't there, one is ready to swallow almost anything, and that's what we do. Based on the authority and prestige and fame and acclamation and dress and makeup of the ones who speak and proclaim and assert. Including the books and scriptures that are used, which are held high and or are totally inaccessible to an ordinary human being. They're hidden behind shrouds of curtains. Every religion handles it a little bit differently. Unless there is insight in oneself, one may not be able to tell where the person is coming from, who's talking. I don't know, this is a good thing to think about, to look into, to test, to question. Not to assume that someone who sits surrounded by people who listen with a microphone is to be believed, is to be followed. But see, the danger is to then think, well, I have to wait till I have this insight before I can think. No, one has to think now. Look now. It's not so hard to see something if one really realizes the danger of gullibility, of following. The danger of exploitation, mutual exploitation that is taking place everywhere, where there's no clarity of seeing and clarity of thinking. The religious arena, the political arena. Everywhere. So can one begin to think intelligently for oneself, seeing where the self-system comes in and wondering whether one can put that aside and look at an issue, a problem, without this me first, my interest, my investment, my knowledge, my experience. It sounds easier maybe than it's done because it's just so permeating this whole system. The whole system is wired with this self-system. And to begin to become aware of this is a tremendous step, a tremendously new thing. To question everything, not to assume that just because it's like this in everybody and has been in me from the beginning, and I've seen it in my parents and teachers, therefore this must somehow or other be right. Millions of people are thinking this way, and it has been going on for thousands of years. This is where we come to tradition again, the danger of tradition. Because a tradition is 2,500 or 5,000 years old, it must have truth in it. It doesn't even hold logically. Or the words that are read, written, spoken, chanted are the truth. We're asking, where do these words come from? And can one come from the same place? So that the words are just a flotsam. Carried by something much deeper. Or used by something much deeper. and that cannot be conveyed in the book. I don't know. Yes, sometimes when an author really speaks out of that, one can feel that. Then one is participating, not in the words, but in where the words come from. So to come back to this point once more, because it is so important, can one begin to think intelligently by looking at what is, by looking at facts, realizing when there is absence of facts, questioning where someone has obtained what is presented as facts. One may not be able to obtain the facts oneself, but one does not need, therefore, to believe someone who presents them. Thinking of all the health books that are issuing from the press about what is right nutrition. It's just an example. And one reads one and it sounds so right because the person's presenting the facts, and one reads another one, it's the opposite, and it's also presenting the facts. One can go nuts over this if one tries to get the right nutrition that way. There again, where is one left? Or are there better sources of facts? Can one find out? If not, will one refrain from believing and be more experimental, testing for oneself and observing, not just according to belief and like and dislike, but to what actually happens? May not be easy. Psychological theory is another thing comes to mind, all the books and therapies coming out. Just read the other day in a Science magazine, there are now 250 or 60 different therapies in this country. And 160,000 therapists. One reads one book and it sounds so convincing, one reads another book and it's the opposite. Or different, and also sounds so convincing. If this isn't clear yet, please, we have days left with meeting time to bring this up. The other thing we were going to talk about this morning is relationship. I've had an interesting relationship with this word relationship. Remember some 12 years ago or so when I was asked to give some talks at a center and started giving talks. The first one was on attention, the second one was on fear and pain. These seem to be very important topics to talk about. One of the staff people toward the end says, "Why don't you talk about relationship?" And for some reason I had no relationship with this word relationship. I didn't know what he meant. Partly not having English as my mother tongue. And he said, "Well, I mean between man and woman, sexuality." Is this what this word mostly evokes? Relationship? I'm going to talk about relationship, meaning the relationship between man and woman. Meanwhile, I have a feeling for this word relationship, but it's not that exclusive. And maybe for you neither. I just brought it up to air it. Yesterday when we were finding out how does one listen to the bird, how is that sound perceived, that's also a question of relationship. What's the relationship to the sound, or to the sight, to the tree which is just bursting into leaves? Relationship with a little ant crawling along the pine floor. Not so little, some of them are quite big. There's a story, an old Chinese Zen story comes to mind, where the disciple, who is a famous government official, comes to see the old teacher. He sort of bursts into the room with a quote about heaven and earth, and I being of the same root, 10,000 things, and myself, no separation. I can hear him reciting this with considerable inspiration, enthusiasm. And the old man stepping into the garden, pointing to a flower in full bloom and saying, people of this world look on this like in a dream. Is one listening to the birds as in a fog, in a dream? The fog, the dream, are the words, the ideas, the associations, the quotes, the inspirational quote that heaven and earth and I are of the same root. Everything, the 10,000 things, and I, there's no separation. Isn't that marvelous, he said too. That's part of that exclamation. Was it actually so for him? See, again, it's such a fine line between the enthusiasm, the utter inspiration and the energy that wells up if one reads something that rings so true, that sounds so marvelously beautiful and peaceful, potentially solving all problems, and assuming that with this energetic enthusiasm one understands. That is understanding. And how can one tell that one doesn't understand? In this case, There's no argument started over, or no poking, testing. Just the pointing to a flower. It's not a personal confrontation. He says, people of the world, look at this as in a dream. Which is a beautiful way, really, of working with someone, isn't it? Because in that, there is the possibility to see something, not to feel personally put on the spot, attacked or quizzed. There's the flowers right there. One can look. Is it the me looking at the flower? A feeling of separateness? My wants, I want to really see that flower like the old man doesn't. I'm sure I don't. He has so many more years of experience. These comparisons, we all know them. The wanting to be enlightened, wanting to have clarity of vision, of awareness. Can one see that that's the dream, the fog? Not reach for the clarity, but see the fog. Really be in touch with it. The wanting, the comparison, the self-image, I'm so good at it, I'm so poor at it. Maybe this man was still so full of his quote. And the thought, the idea of understanding. But he didn't see that he didn't see the flower. That flower still was a concept. And the moment one asks oneself, well, is a flower a concept to me, or is this bird a concept to me? Then there's doubt. I probably still have a concept of it. And that's the fog, that's the dream. It takes a fresh moment, a leap over all of the straw that we've been talking about. Not intentionally. It doesn't happen that way. Intention is fog and dream. Will is dream and fog. It's this space of utter not knowing, not expecting or wanting. The openness that goes with it. And then the flower, the sounds, they're there. And then, of course, we've met, all of us have met many times, and what comes up next is, all right, I can see the flower can be seen, the bird has been heard. But what about when I get home to my wife or husband, or to the workplace, my children? all the children's in school, or in a retreat, to hear the bird without a feeling of separation, or to see a flower without any dream. That's relatively easy. To many people, it's already a threatening thought. How will it be again when I come home? And very often the thought is already predisposing one, isn't it? There's already the assumption it'll be like it was. I know how it used to be, and I doubt whether it'll be much different, because I've been to other retreats, and when I came home, it was pretty much the same thing. Or maybe this openness lasted for a month or whatever time, and then it closed up again, and will it be like this again? I'm quite sure this is human, this is what we are, and so forth thought going on, which is again the dream, isn't it? The pattern perpetuating itself and strengthening itself in the process. It was one of the axioms in learning psychology when I used to go to school, that every time you think about something or do something in the same way, it's stronger for the next time. The synapses grow, thicken, or whatever the brain explanation for it is. Or not just explanation, what actually happens there. Why do we anticipate? Because we're afraid. We want something to stay. We want something to be different. And with this wanting and anticipating and preparing, how can we meet one's husband or wife or children freshly? One is already preparing to meet the straw. The fear of it somehow may make it come true. Do you see that? Because the question with meeting one's husband or wife or children or boss or people who work for one, anybody, person in the grocery store, the car mechanic, can one meet each other without image, without remembering, without knowing what a person is? Let's not say without remembering, because obviously one remembers one's relatives and people one knows. One has the memory image of this person, one knows what he or she looked like. And one, of course, remembers what their idiosyncrasies are, their weaknesses and problems and so forth. But can one see right now clearly that if that memory comes in between, if one greets the memory of one's wife or husband or children, then one doesn't greet the real person. And I think one can also see, I think that's the truth, that one does not know a person, no matter how long one has lived with each other. One knows a lot, one has a lot of memory, knows a lot about each other. But sometimes, don't you have this experience, sometimes you're with a person that you know so well, and you're in new company, in different company, with different people that you haven't been with before, and all of a sudden, the person you know so well acts and talks and looks like you've never seen her before. So it's one's own grind that keeps the other person in the same grind. The grind of habitual reactions and expectations and needs and wants. So if one could lay down this underlying assumption that one knows each other, not as a matter of principle or as a device, but because it is so, one doesn't know each other completely. Because there's always a fresh day, always a new possibility for each one of us. No matter how we may think about ourselves. How we think about ourselves is just what we think, but that's not the truth. It's just ideas based on the past. So how fresh and new is oneself in meeting someone one has been with for a long time or for a short time? New in terms of suspending in the energy of attention and awareness ancient reactions and expectations. Is that possible? It takes some inner silence and space, doesn't it? Space meaning airiness, some light to look, to listen. Without expectation, not saying, all right, I'll do this, but I hope this will affect this person and he or she will change too. That's trouble. That's the self-system in operation, in its subtle operation, manipulations. I'll do this, but I need to see results to keep this up. There's too much energy. Has to have its rewards. One may find to one's surprise that when the self-system is, let's not say totally, but somewhat disconnected. It's not solidly in operation with its compulsions and obsessions and its mechanicalness. When that is sort of disconnected, on hold, then the other, what we call the other, isn't there for one, for me. As when the self-system is there, the other is there for me, isn't it so? For my needs, my rewards, and the whole thing. And this is how I perceive the other, expect to be treated. When this isn't an operation, then this other person isn't there for me. And that may be the first time that there can be a true perception, a directness, a being in touch with this person. Not as someone for me, but as whatever is happening right now. A person may immediately make demands upon me because, and one will understand that because that self-system operates in all of us. It's the same thing. Seeing each other in terms of our own needs and wants. Not just each other, but the whole world. And that prevents seeing the flower, the bird, the husband or wife or children, or the boss, person working for one, or the cashier, the car mechanic. In a new light. Not that that person magically changes, one just sees. I think that's relationship. Being related, if one even wants to use that word at this point. Because if there's no solid, grinding, reaching, groping, demanding self-system, then everything is just there. And not with this chore and burden of having to relate to it, or to her, or to him. When I'm there, as a self, you, everybody, when we're here as a self, we create each other in our own image, how we want each other to be. Is that so? All the old created images come into play. And then relationship becomes a matter of adjusting our wants in a certain way. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not possible. When the wants run parallel, then one thinks one has a terrific relationship, because both partners are out for the same thing. And as long as that lasts, the relationship may be considered or feeling as harmonious. But when the goal is accomplished, then there may be again one want colliding with the want of the other, and new adjustments needing to be made. Either they can be made or they can't be made, and then there's a separation. I mean, people separate. The separation was there all along. As long as there's the self-system of operation, that is the essence of separation. I think we've talked about this enough, that the words are clear, and one has seen this for oneself here, hasn't one? The separating powers of being locked in this self. I can hear someone say, but doesn't one have legitimate needs that need to be taken care of? Is everything selfish? That again, whom is one asking? One has to look. Obviously one has to eat, and one can find out that eating well, one functions differently from if one eats poorly. If one doesn't get rest, works long hours, and then after work, long hours of entertainment and very little sleep, then in the next morning there's tiredness, irritability, a very low threshold for anger or frustration. That all is observable. No one needs to tell one can see it. Need for warmth or for coolness. The body functioning better if it's not too hot, not too cold. If one exercises, runs or climbs or walks, does yoga, whatever, one can feel the energy, the pliability of the body. That does not need to be labeled selfish. I think that is intelligent living. Taking intelligent care of the body. Like somebody who loves his car takes good care of the car. Drives around for 5 miles before stopping. It's not good for the car, it's known. So one does that. The car lasts longer, so that one learns from intelligent care. Sometimes when I go through these intelligent ways of taking care of the body, then people will say, well, doesn't this belong in there too, and what about that? I think some of these things are for each one of us to find out for ourselves. And there's nothing that prevents seeing motive and expectation of satisfaction, and to see whether that becomes a self-enclosing, divisive factor, or whether it does not impede the free-flowing relationship at all. That's the beauty of seeing and looking for oneself. One need not ask an authority, because then immediately one will follow that, and not something atrophies in oneself. The perception of consequences of doing this and doing that. They're all snowed under following instructions of an authority. Anyways, it's never a question here of what should I do, what must I do, but what am I doing? Not according to any standards of morality or spirituality, but according to no standards. That's the dream. Standards are the dream. Then I can't see the flower. If I compare it with the neighbor's peony, which is so much bigger, they must have used better fertilizer or something. So we can leave that question sit there as a nightlight. How are we related to each other? Not answer it, but look. And not think I have to wait till I'm enlightened before I can look. One can only look now. One cannot look in the next life. Look at the shadow, look at whatever's there. And listen at the same time. Without any protective covers. Which means vulnerable, like the flower. We will end here for today.